Phil Donahue passes away at the age of 88 after a long illness. He was part of American daytime television. Before Phil, if there was no Phil, there would have never been an Oprah. He is the king of daytime talk, now passing at the ripe old age of 88. He talked to everybody, and he did shows before people were doing the throw chairs and yell, Jerry, Jerry.
Yeah.
Little Mavis is not you are not the father. That, with Maury Povich.
Yeah,
none of that. He would have on guests that, at 10 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning, you're like, wow, look, it's Louis Farrakhan. Wow, look, it's Madeline O'Hare, the famous atheist. He had politicians on. He had everybody on. And it would be a whole hour-long show. He'd go into the audience. He'd ask questions. He'd have long, rambling questions. He would ask the guest. He'd take phone calls from people. He started in a small town, started in radio, then went to Ohio, came out of Ohio, and then he went to Chicago. And then from Chicago, he ended up going into New York. But for the longest time, I forget how long the show ran for, he was
30 years.
30 years of doing that show. He had that floppy, grayish, white hair, little bit of salt and pepper in there, some big sort of glasses from the 80s. And he just became known for having interesting guests on and asking interesting questions of the guest. This is one, of course, my favorite because I love Milton Friedman. I love where Phil comes down. He had Milton Friedman on for 2 whole days, 2 different days, one after another, talking about economics. And he asked this question of Milton Friedman. You got to show? You want me to do it? You want to do it? You do it.
When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy.
Yeah. Listen, I love seeing him on because whenever Phil was on, it meant that the bus was gone. I had faked my parents out. I didn't have to go to school that day.
Oh, that was your
when his show would come on.
Show.
Dun, 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 dun. They hit Chicago, and his name would fly up on some crappy graphic. So one time, my father won tickets at an auction to go to a Phil Donahue show. And my brother,
move on.
No, you haven't heard this one. And my brother goes, "Oh God, Dad, no, come with me because your brother's busy. Come with me." And they were having on famous Mayor Ed Koch of New York.
Oh, yeah.
Ay, ay, ay. And Chuck goes, my dad was just dying to ask a question. Dying. And during the commercial break, they're like, okay, here are some of the questions that topics we're going to talk about, this and that and this and that. And Chuck goes, Dad, none of those topics with the mayor have anything to do with the question you're going to ask. Who cares? Chuck goes, I think it's going to be a problem because they kind of already passed what they were going to talk about. You missed your chance to ask that question. Hey, Chuck, there's no way they can stop me. So they go, all right, who's got a question regarding housing in New York and then the idea of rent control? So my dad raised, okay, so the director says, all right, Alan, we're going to go down front here. We'll get this guy in the red sweater. It's my dad. We'll spin over this way. We'll come up. So we'll get 1. There's 2, 4, 5. Those are the 6 questions. We'll take care of those. Coming out in 1 minute. Here we go, Phil. So they come out. By the way, I told my dad not to wear red because it sticks out. Like extras never wear red in a movie. I said, don't wear red because the camera, everybody's eye just naturally goes to you. So, of course, he wore a giant red sweater. He sits right. He said, hey, listen, I paid a lot of money for those tickets. So I'm going to ask you a question. So Phil starts talking about, talk about housing, can't find a place to live. Milton, what do you plan on doing about that? What are you going to do? Says to the mayor of New York. And then he answers his question, and then he goes, I think you've got a question. And my dad goes, I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier. And Phil goes to pull the mic away, and my dad goes, come on, hey, Phil. I bought these tickets. Phil's trying to grab the microphone. Hey, Phil, this is a good question. Listen, Phil, you're going to love this question. And my brother's like, if I could rotate my body at such a speed, counterclockwise or clockwise, and drill myself into the floor, I would gladly do that right now. And Dad's like, hey, Phil, come on. Give me a break here. Mayor, you're going to love this question. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Chuck goes, whatever you do, you've got to watch it. Because I think they would tape like 3 days in advance or something. It was so painful. It takes him a minute because he's doing, hey, so you got a lady, all right? So she's selling a loaf of bread for $1, all right? And then you got a guy comes along, you done this salad, Kevin. And they're like, what the hell is question? Luckily for my father, it never made air.
Oh.
Cut it out.
What? So what was the question?
Who knows? Who knows? Something he knew the answer to, but he just wanted to see Ed Koch kind of squirm around. He was, you do those talk shows where the person isn't asking a question; they're just making a statement.
They want to do a gotcha.
And then at the end, they make their voice go up at the end and make it sound like a question.
Okay.
Ay. But Chuck said to me when I wrote to Chuck this morning, he said, "Had Phil Donahue passed away?" He said, we went to that show. When the show's over, Phil stands at the studio door and shakes hands with every single person who was in the audience.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. I said, even my father, he had a ball talking to Dad. It's like, Jack, I've been in this business way too long not to deal with people like you. And the first lesson in all of this broadcasting is never let him get the mic. Because you put the hand on the mic and you're wrestling. Stop throwing it. Don't let him go. Don't let him on the microphone. God bless Phil Donahue. Married to Marlo Thomas. They met. I forget how old she was at the time, and they lived in separate cities. And then finally, Phil said he wanted to move to New York to be closer to Marlo Thomas. She continues to do her great work with St. Jude. So she said today that she lost her most favorite person in the whole wide world. So Phil Donahue passing, but not before one more little cut here. This is the it's ABC News update on him. What do you advance? Oh, the summit.
Yeah, the summit.
This is so weird. Back in the 80s when there was this whole idea that, Russia was going to blow us up and we're going to blow them up. It was a real concern for people. The Cold War, there were ABC did this famous movie, I think, called The Day After. It was all about what would happen if the total annihilation of the world. So Phil decided to get Russian residents and American residents, two people in various parts of the world that were always at each other's throats, but not really, and allow the Russians to ask questions of Americans.
This will be a first step, albeit a trembling one, but a first step towards understanding. And when we understand, then we will no longer be afraid of each other. There'll be no paranoia. There'll be normal conversation. First and foremost, we have to understand. This is my feeling about today's meeting.
May I say, Vladimir
Posner.
May I say, please, we do have prejudices about each other. Nevertheless, we are impressed with all that you've done to rally from the ashes of World War II. We have babies we want to save, and we know you do too. And we're hopeful that while this dialogue will not solve all the world problems, we hope that it is the toe in the water and that it is the beginning of a series of exchanges that will allow us, each other, to know each other better and perhaps in the long term save more of our babies. We thank you very, very much for this dialogue.
That was King 5's Citizen Summit, is it there?
Right here in Seattle.
Yeah. Oh, was it in Seattle they did it?
Yeah. King 5, Seattle, baby.
Wow, they're at the King 5 studios?
Evidently.
How about that?
Thank you, Felix.